everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be talking about something pretty foundational to American democracy. We're going to be taking a look at Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution.
Article 1. The heart of the matter.
This is where it all begins, you know?
Awesome.
The foundation of our legislative branch.
It's the legislative branch.
Congress.
Yeah, the very first article of the Constitution. And appropriately so, because
How the laws get made.
it's the foundation of our government. It's how we make laws in the USA. And you know what?
Yeah.
It impacts every single aspect of our lives,
It really does.
even today.
Absolutely. And, honestly, when I first really sat down and looked at article, I was struck by how much I didn't know.
Oh, I bet.
There's
There's some really interesting stuff in there.
There is. I mean, did you know, for example, that there used to be a cap on how many representatives each state could have, based on population?
Yeah, that's right.
Or that senators were, initially chosen by state legislatures,
Right.
not by, us voting directly.
Wild.
Right?
That's crazy.
It's true.
Yeah.
Those are just a couple of the many fascinating little details you'll find in article. I think the framers, they really put a lot of thought into how they wanted Congress to operate.
They did.
And why this separation of powers was so important.
Yeah. So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Article I starts out, it starts out strong right off the bat. Section 1 basically says, hey, all legislative power goes to Congress. And we're talking about the Senate and the House of Representatives.
Straight to the point.
Right to the point.
And that right there, that's a revolutionary idea compared to, what the framers had just experienced under British rule.
Yeah.
They were determined to prevent any one person or any entity from having too much power.
Right.
So this idea of dividing the government into three branches, legislative, executive, and judicial checks and balances, exactly.
This becomes so central to the U.S. Constitution.
It's brilliant.
It is.
So it's like a three-way tug of war, with each branch keeping the others in check.
Yeah, it is.
Congress makes the laws, the president carries them out, and the courts decide if they're constitutional.
That's it. You got it.
Perfect.
That's the system.
Now, Section 2 of Article really dives into, the House of Representatives.
Okay.
It even tells us, who can run for office.
It does.
You have to be 25 years old. You have to have been a U.S. citizen for at least 7 years. And you have to live in the state that you want to represent.
Yep. Those are the basics.
I think I qualify.
You meet the requirements, but, of course, getting elected, that's a whole other ball game.
Right. Campaigning's not really my thing.
Sure.
But it's kind of amazing to me that, the Constitution just lays this out,
It does.
It really does mean that everyday people, like our listeners, can potentially serve in Congress.
That's right. It reflects that fundamental principle of American democracy. The idea that our government derives its power from the consent of the governed.
It's beautiful.
It is.
Now, Section 2 also gets into the kind of nitty-gritty of how many representatives each state gets, which we all know is based on population.
Of course.
Originally, they used this really kind of complicated formula that counted enslaved people as 3/5 of a person.
The infamous 3/5 compromise.
Like 3/5 and compromise, yeah.
Which,
it's a tough one.
It's really a dark chapter in our nation's history.
Yeah.
It reflects the deep-seated racism and the political realities of the time.
It's just a stark reminder that even, foundational documents like the Constitution are products of their time.
They are.
With all the complexities.
For sure.
And imperfections.
Absolutely.
But it also makes you appreciate how far we've come since then.
Yeah.
Although...
Yeah, we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go.
Right, absolutely.
Understanding that historical context, I think, is absolutely crucial when we study the Constitution.
Yes, definitely.
I think sometimes we forget that.
We do.
Yeah.
So back then, states like Virginia had a lot of power in the House because they had a larger population, including those who were enslaved.
Right.
And Section 2 even lists out how many representatives each of the original 13 states got.
It does.
And some of them might surprise you.
Yeah, some of them are definitely head-scratchers.
I know New York, for example, only had 6 representatives initially.
Compared to Virginia's 10.
Yeah.
Right? So very different.
And, of course, populations shift.
They do.
Which is why we have a census every 10 years.
Every 10 years. Got to count everybody.
To adjust the representation.
And make sure that each state's voice is heard proportionally in the House.
Makes sense.
It's all about fairness, right?
Now, what happens if a representative leaves office before their term is up?
Oh, that's a good question. That happens. Well, Section 2 actually has a plan for that, too.
Okay.
So if there's a vacancy,
Uh-huh.
the state's governor is the one that holds a special election
Okay.
to fill that seat.
Gotcha.
And it also gives the House the power to choose its speaker,
Right.
who is the leader that presides over the sessions, and to initiate impeachment proceedings.
Ooh, impeachment.
Yes.
That's a big one.
It is a big one.
So the House of Representatives
Yeah.
can formally accuse a federal official,
Right.
like the president, of wrongdoing.
Uh-huh.
But the actual trial happens in the Senate, right?
That's exactly right.
It's a two-step process.
2 steps.
Okay.
2 steps designed to make sure
Right.
it's very careful
Yes.
and a very deliberate
Very serious
approach to such a serious matter.
So the House accuses, the Senate judges,
That's right.
and it requires a 2/3 majority in the Senate to actually remove someone from office.
It's a high bar.
That's high bar. 2/3.
It is.
The framers really did not want to make it easy
Not at all.
to just kick someone out of office.
No, they did not.
On a whim.
They understood the potential for abuse.
Right.
And they wanted to really safeguard against that.
So that's the House.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the Senate.
The Senate.
Section 3.
Okay.
They have slightly higher age and citizenship requirements.
A little bit.
30-year gold and 9 years a citizen instead of 25 and 7.
It's a slightly more, I guess you could say, exclusive club.
So they wanted the Senate to be a little bit more...
I think they envisioned it as this more deliberative body,
Right.
less susceptible to the whims of public opinion,
Okay.
hence the longer terms.
Right. 6 years compared to the House's 2.
Yeah.
And this is interesting, too, that they were originally intended to be chosen by state legislatures.
Right.
Which is very different from how we elect senators today.
That's right. We vote for them directly.
Thanks to the 17th Amendment.
The 17th Amendment. Thank you, 17th Amendment.
Yeah.
Which shifted that power.
Yeah. From state legislatures to the people making the Senate much more directly accountable
Yes.
to the voters.
So initially it was meant to be a little bit more removed from the day-to-day politics of the House.
Uh-huh.
And the senators would be focused on the long-term interest of their states.
A little bit more insulated from those whims that we were talking about.
Now, those 6-year terms are staggered.
Yeah.
Meaning only 1/3 of the Senate is up for election every 2 years.
That's right.
Why is that?
Well, this was designed to prevent those drastic shifts
Okay.
in the Senate's makeup.
Right.
So it promotes stability and continuity.
So it's kind of like a rolling election cycle for the Senate.
Yeah.
You've always got a mix of experienced senators and newly elected ones.
That's the idea.
Okay, that makes sense.
Keep things moving smoothly.
Now, Section 3 also clarifies who leads the Senate.
Okay.
It's the Vice President of the United States.
Oh, yes. The VP.
So they get to preside over the Senate. They do.
But they only vote if there's a tie.
Right, they're like the tiebreaker referee.
The Senate also chooses other officers,
They do.
including a president pro tempore, to preside when the VP's absent.
Right. Gotta have a backup.
So the VP is like the tiebreaker referee.
Yeah.
But they have other duties, so the Senate's got a backup ref
You got it.
as well.
Such a great analogy.
And as we mentioned earlier, the Senate's role in impeachment trials
Oh, yes.
is crucial.
Crucial.
Right. The House brings the charges, but the Senate actually conducts the trial acting as judge and jury.
That's right.
And that 2/3 majority vote requirement for a conviction just really emphasizes
It does.
how seriously the framers took removing someone from office.
They did not want it to be a partisan tool
Yeah.
or a decision made lightly.
Let's move on to Section 4,
Okay.
which covers elections for both the House and the Senate.
Uh-huh.
Sounds like the states had a lot of say in how elections were run.
Initially, yes. Section 4 gives states the power to determine the times, places, and manner of holding elections.
Okay.
But importantly, Congress retains the power to intervene and regulate those elections if needed.
So it's a delicate balance.
It is a delicate balance.
Between states' rights
Yes,
and federal oversight.
that's right. One of the many tensions
No kidding.
that we find in the Constitution.
And this issue of federal versus state control over elections
Why?
continues to be devoted today.
Oh, big time.
It's a hot topic.
Always a hot topic.
Section 4 also states that Congress must meet at least once a year.
At least once a year.
Can you imagine if they only met, like,
Oh, my goodness.
every decade or so?
The backlog of bills would be insane.
Oh, my God.
And the State of the Union address.
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine?
We can be very thankful for that at least once a year requirement.
Absolutely. We can be thankful for that.
Okay, so that's Section 4 now. Sections 5 and 6 cover kind of the inner workings
Oh,
of
yeah.
Congress rules privileges. And yes, even paychecks
Paychecks
for our lawmaker.
are doing the people's business.
Now, these sections might not seem as exciting as, like, the power to declare war or something.
Right.
But they're essential for understanding how Congress functions on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. They lay the groundwork
Right.
for how business gets done in the House and the Senate.
So let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Section 5 essentially says that each chamber of Congress, the House and the Senate, gets to set its own rules.
That's right.
It's like each one's its own little mini government
Yeah, you could say
with
that.
its own rule book.
They decide how they're going to conduct business.
Yeah.
How they're going to discipline their members.
Right.
And how they're going to keep records.
And importantly,
Yes.
those records are public.
They are. Public transparency
Transparency
is key in a democracy.
We have a right to know what our elected officials are up to.
Absolutely no secret handshakes.
Right.
No backroom deals.
At least not undocumented ones. Now Section 6 gets into, like, the more practical matters,
Yeah.
like compensation
Right.
for members of Congress.
Got to get paid.
Senators and representatives, they get paid for their work.
Of course you can't expect them to do it for free.
Right. But I gotta admit, the fact that Congress sets its own salary
Yeah.
kind of raises an eyebrow.
It's a provision that has sparked quite a few debates.
I bet.
Over the years, some argue that, it creates a conflict of interest.
Right.
Others say it's totally necessary to attract qualified people to public service.
Yeah. I mean, if someone else was setting their pay, wouldn't they always try to lowball them?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's a tricky situation.
It's a tricky situation. There's no easy answer.
Right.
But I think regardless of the debate, it's important just to understand how it works.
Right.
And why it was included in the Constitution.
Speaking of things that spark debate,
Oh, boy.
Section 6 also prevents members of Congress from holding other government jobs while they're in office.
That's right.
No double dipping.
No double dipping.
In the government cookie jar.
No, sir.
I mean, it makes you wonder how many people would even want to be in Congress if they couldn't write their own paychecks or hold another government job on the side.
That's an interesting thought experiment, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, would it attract a different type of candidate?
Yeah.
Would it change the dynamics of power
Right.
in Congress? Who knows?
Lots to think about.
Yeah, a lot to think about. But
Okay,
so we have more
what-
Article 1 to cover.
We've got a lot more to unpack, but that's going to have to wait
Yes, it will.
for part 2.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Article 1 of the Constitution. We're picking up where we left off, exploring these incredible powers that Congress has. It's like they've got this whole toolkit for shaping the nation.
It's true. And one of the most powerful tools in that kit is the ability to regulate commerce.
Yes, the Commerce Clause.
The Commerce Clause.
I remember hearing about that in history class, but honestly, I never really fully grasped, its significance.
It's one of those clauses that seems so simple and straightforward at first glance.
Right.
But it has had just a massive impact
Yeah.
on the relationship between the federal government and the states.
So Article 1, Section 8, it gives Congress the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes.
That's right. That's the wording.
Okay, so on the surface, it just seems like it's about trade
Right.
between states.
Yeah. Buying and selling stuff.
But you're saying it's a lot more than that?
Much more. Over the years, the Supreme Court has interpreted the Commerce Clause so broadly
Okay.
that encompasses just this huge range of activities
Wow.
that you might not think are directly related to buying and selling goods across state lines.
So give us an example.
Sure.
Like, how has the Commerce Clause been stretched beyond its seemingly simple purpose?
Well, imagine a farmer growing wheat on their own land,
Okay.
and they're intending to use it solely for their own personal consumption. They're not selling it. They're not trading it.
Just feeding their family?
They're just going to feed their family with this wheat.
Okay.
Could Congress regulate that?
I mean, I would think that's out of their jurisdiction.
You would think so, right?
It's not interstate commerce.
That's what a lot of people thought.
Yeah.
But in a landmark case, Wickard versus Filburn, back in 1942,
Okay.
the Supreme Court actually upheld a federal law that limited the amount of wheat
Wow.
a farmer could grow, even for their own personal use.
Really? I'm curious how they justified that.
Well, the court's reasoning
Yeah.
was that even though one farmer's actions might seem purely local,
Okay.
if you imagine thousands of farmers all across the country doing the same thing,
Uh-huh.
then all of a sudden there's this ripple effect.
Okay.
It impacts the national wheat market,
Right.
which is subject to federal regulation under the Commerce Clause.
It's like the butterfly effect.
It is like the butterfly effect
Wheat.
of wheat. Exactly. One farmer's personal crop might not seem like much, but multiply that by thousands and thousands of farmers, and suddenly it can actually shift
Right.
the balance of supply and demand across the entire country.
Okay, so this broad interpretation of the Commerce Clause, it's been used to justify a lot of federal laws, including ones related to civil rights, workplace safety, environmental protection.
That's right. All sorts of things.
So it's something like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited discrimination in, you know, places of public accommodation, that was upheld based on the power to regulate commerce.
That's right. The argument was that discrimination in businesses,
Yeah.
like restaurants and hotels, actually had a negative impact on interstate commerce.
Okay.
Because by refusing service to certain people,
Right.
those businesses were disrupting the flow of goods and services across state lines.
It's fascinating how these seemingly, unrelated things can be linked back to commerce.
It is.
Highlights how interconnected our
It-
society is.
For sure.
Now, the Commerce Clause, it's not without controversy, right?
Of course not.
Some argue that this broad interpretation, it gives the federal government way too much power.
Right.
And infringes on states' rights.
That's a common criticism.
Yeah. Where do you draw the line between, regulating commerce for the good of the nation and overstepping into areas that should be left to the states?
Yeah. That's $1 million question, isn't it?
Right.
It's a question that is constantly being debated
Yeah.
in legal circles and political arenas.
Makes sense.
The Constitution is open to interpretation,
Right.
and those interpretations can have just a profound impact
Yeah.
on the balance of power between the federal government and the states.
It's a good reminder that even something like the Commerce Clause, which seems pretty straightforward,
Right.
can lead to these ongoing debates about the role of government and individual liberty.
Absolutely. It's a classic example of that.
Okay, so we've covered regulating commerce. What's another big power granted to Congress?
Well, one that I think touches every single American is the power to tax and spend.
Right. This is how the government funds itself. Everything from, roads and bridges to national defense to social programs all relies on Congress's ability to raise and allocate money.
That's right. And Article 1, Section 8,
Mhm.
it lays it out pretty clearly. It says, Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises,
Okay.
to pay the debts, and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States.
So Congress gets to decide how much we pay in taxes and where that money goes.
They do.
I imagine that's a source of constant debate.
Oh, you bet it is. I mean, think about it. Every dollar the government spends is a dollar that it collected from someone's paycheck.
Right.
There are always going to be disagreements about,
Yeah.
how much to tax, what to tax, and how to prioritize that spending.
No kidding. And that general welfare part,
Yeah.
that seems pretty broad.
It does.
What does that actually encompass?
Well, that is a question that has been debated since the very beginning.
Okay.
Some people argue that the General Welfare Clause, it limits Congress to spending only on things that are specifically listed in the Constitution. Others believe it gives Congress this much wider authority to fund a broader range of programs and initiatives.
So one interpretation leads to kind of a more limited government,
Yeah,
and the other allows for a more expansive role for the government in addressing societal needs.
exactly. And where you fall on that spectrum
Right.
often influences your views on a whole host of issues.
Right. From healthcare to education to social safety nets.
That's right.
It really highlights how so many of our political debates are rooted in these different interpretations of the Constitution.
They really are. And I think the debates around the power to tax and spend, they're some of the most consequential in our whole political system because, you know what?
They shape how the government functions.
Exactly. They determine how the government functions and how resources are allocated
Right.
in society.
It's a good reminder that civics isn't just this, dry subject we learn about in school. This is about real life decisions that impact all of us.
Absolutely. They have real-world implications.
So really do.
Okay.
So
But speaking of consequential decisions,
yes.
let's not forget about one of the most solemn powers
Yeah.
granted to Congress, the power to declare war.
This is about as serious as it gets, right?
It is.
We're talking about sending American troops into harm's way, putting their lives on the line,
potentially sacrificing their lives.
And Article 1, Section 8, it clearly states that Congress has the power to declare war.
It does.
So that was a very deliberate choice.
It was
made by the framers.
very deliberate.
Okay.
They wanted to ensure that such a momentous decision wasn't made lightly or by a single person.
So it's a check on the president's power as
Absolutely.
commander-in-chief of the military.
It's a crucial check on that power.
Okay.
The framers understood that the power to wage war
Uh-huh.
could be easily abused.
Right.
So they vested it in the legislative branch,
Mm-hmm.
which is more directly accountable to the people.
It's interesting how that's played out in history, right?
It is.
We've had, formal declarations of war like World War II, but then also all these military engagements that Congress didn't officially declare war for.
That's right. Think about conflicts like the Korean War,
Yeah.
the Vietnam War,
Yeah.
the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Right.
All of these involved U.S. troops being deployed without a formal declaration of war by Congress.
So it sounds like things have gotten a bit blurry over time.
A little bit, yeah.
Has Congress's war power been weakened, or has the nature of warfare just changed so much that the framers couldn't have predicted these scenarios?
That's a tough question to answer.
Right.
It's a really complex issue
Yeah.
with no easy answers.
Okay.
Some people argue that the president has accumulated too much power in this area,
Right.
bypassing Congress's constitutional authority. Others maintain that, the nature of modern warfare, it often requires swift action.
Yeah.
That makes a formal declaration of war impractical.
It's another example of how the Constitution written centuries ago is still being interpreted and reinterpreted
It is.
in light of new challenges.
That's the beauty of it, in a way.
It's a living document.
It is a living document.
And the debate over war powers, it's one that's likely to continue.
For sure. As long as the U.S. is a global power, we're going to be grappling with this.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about these powers. We've been talking about regulating commerce, taxing and spending, declaring war.
Big powers.
Some of the most consequential that any government can have.
Absolutely. And as vast as they are, they're not unlimited.
Right. We've talked about the idea of checks and balances and how the Constitution places limits on Congress's authority.
It does. And that's where we'll pick up in part 3 of our deep dive.
Okay.
We're going to explore those limitations. We're going to look at how the framers tried to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful and ensure that, liberty and justice prevail.
Stay tuned for the final chapter of our exploration of Article. We'll be getting into those safeguards that the framers put in place to protect our rights and ensure that government power is exercised responsibly. This is where it gets really interesting. All right, so welcome back to our final part of this deep dive
Part 3,
into Article 1.
the grand finale.
We've spent the last 2 parts, really digging into the structure of Congress, who can be a part of it,
Yeah.
and these amazing powers that they have.
Incredible powers really shaping the nation.
But we all know with great power comes
Great responsibility.
great responsibility.
Spider-Man taught us that.
And the need for some pretty serious boundaries.
Absolutely. The framers, they weren't just concerned with, giving Congress the tools to govern.
Right.
They were equally focused on making sure that that power wouldn't be abused.
That's right. So let's talk about the limits.
Yeah, let's get into the limits,
Built into Article I.
the constraints.
What kind of safeguards are in place to protect our rights and prevent any one branch from, getting too big for its britches?
Well, we've already touched on some of them
Yeah.
in the previous parts.
Yeah, we talked about taxes.
Taxes. Remember that requirement for taxing to be uniform throughout the U.S.?
Right. No favoring one state over another.
Can't do that.
And bills of attainder ex post facto laws.
Ah, yes. Those protections against bills of attainder and ex post facto laws.
I'm so glad that the government can't just decide something's illegal and then punish people for doing it before it was illegal.
Retroactively punishing people.
Yeah.
No. That violates fundamental principles of justice.
Right.
The framers were not having that.
And they made sure to put that in there.
They put their foot down on that one.
But there's more, right?
Oh, yeah, we've got more.
So
We got to dive deeper into sections 9 and 10
sections 9 and 10,
of Article Y.
where the real nitty-gritty limitations are.
That's where we find even more
Okay.
explicit limitations on both Congress and the states.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Lead the way.
All right, let's talk about one of the most significant limitations.
Okay.
And it's the prohibition against suspending the writ of habeas corpus.
Ooh, that sounds very legalese.
I know it sounds like legal jargon,
Yeah.
but bear with me. It's actually a pretty simple concept
Okay.
and a really powerful one.
All right. Break it down for us.
All right, so habeas corpus, literally in Latin, it means you shall have the body.
Okay.
And essentially, it's a legal principle that protects you from being unlawfully detained.
Okay, so no secret prisons.
No disappearing into a black hole.
No black holes.
If you're arrested,
Uh-huh.
you have the right to be brought before a judge,
Okay.
to have the charges against you explained.
So it's a safeguard against tyranny and abuse of power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's making sure that the government can't just snatch you up and make you disappear without any due process.
I like it.
And the Constitution is very clear.
Yeah.
Congress can't suspend this, right?
Okay.
Except in very, very narrow circumstances,
So, like,
in cases of rebellion or invasion,
okay.
where public safety is at stake.
So they were really thinking about, individual liberty, even during times of crisis.
They'd seen firsthand how easily power could be corrupted,
Mm-hmm.
and they were determined to prevent the government from overstepping its boundaries
Right.
and encroaching on the fundamental rights of citizens.
It's a good reminder that, our rights, they aren't just automatically guaranteed.
They're
They
not.
have to be constantly protected, even from those in power.
Especially from those in power.
All right, so what else?
All right, another big one found in Section 9.
Okay.
This is the prohibition against Congress granting titles of nobility.
No dukes and duchesses.
No dukes, no duchesses, no sirs, no ladies.
I haven't gotten my invitation to the royal court yet.
I'm still waiting on mine.
So why was this in there?
Well, this reflects the framers' commitment to a republican form of government.
Okay.
Power resides in the people,
Right.
not in some, hereditary aristocracy.
So they didn't want like a King George situation?
Exactly. They wanted to break away from that old world system of inherited privilege.
It's all about, equal opportunity.
Absolutely.
And the government being accountable to the people.
That's the heart of it.
I like it. Okay, so moving on to Section 10. Are there limitations on states too?
Oh, yeah. Section 10, that's where we see that similar limitations are placed on the states.
So give us some examples.
Well, for example, states can't enter into treaties.
Okay.
They can't coin money,
Makes sense.
and they can't impair the obligation of contracts.
So it's like states, they have their own areas where they have authority,
Right.
but they can't step on the toes of the federal government
Can't overstep those boundaries.
or infringe on individual rights.
Exactly. You got to maintain that
It's
balance.
that balance of power.
It's all about balance.
It's amazing to think how much, foresight the framers had.
That really is.
They were essentially creating this whole new form of government
From scratch.
from scratch. And they managed to think about all these potential problems.
And build in those safeguards?
Yeah, to protect us.
To protect us from tyranny.
But I mean, they couldn't have predicted everything.
Of course not.
Right, societies change.
Technology advances.
Yeah, new challenges pop up all the time.
Right. New things are always coming up.
So how does this document that was written over 200 years ago
Right.
stay relevant today?
That is the question, isn't it?
It is.
Well, that's where the amendment process comes in.
Yes.
The framers, they knew that the Constitution needed to be a living document,
Right.
capable of adapting to changing times
Right.
and evolving values.
So Article V
Article V.
lays out how amendments can be proposed and ratified.
That's right.
And we've had 27 amendments
We had 27 amendments.
to the Constitution so far.
It's been amended 27 times.
That's a lot.
It is a lot.
And they've done things like expanding voting rights, abolishing slavery,
Yeah.
clarifying powers of the federal government.
Addressing a whole range of issues.
So the Constitution's not set in stone.
No, it's not etched in stone.
It can evolve.
It can evolve.
It's a dynamic,
It's a dynamic document.
constantly being reinterpreted.
Yes, in light of new situations and challenges.
It's pretty incredible to think that this document, written centuries ago, it's still guiding us today.
It is. And you know what?
And it can continue to evolve.
It has the capacity to continue evolving with us as we move forward.
Well, everyone, we've reached the end
We have.
of our deep dive into like the U.S. Constitution.
We explored it all.
We really did.
Its structure, its powers, its limitations, its adaptability.
And I hope our listeners have gained a new appreciation
I hope so, too.
for this, incredibly important document
Foundational document.
and its relevance to all of our lives.
It's still relevant today.
But the conversation doesn't have to end here.
No, it doesn't.
We want you to keep exploring the Constitution, think critically about its interpretation and application, and most importantly, be active participants in shaping the future of our democracy.
Yes, get involved.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and engaged.